When I first was introduced to her, it was by way of Moses. Actually in the Bible, he is one of my favorite characters, and what he symbolized was setting people free. But when I learned that there was a woman who they called Moses, she was like the Moses of her day and her time.
Run, Mary, run, run, Martha, run, run, Mary, run. I say, you've got a right to the tree of life. You've got a right to the tree of life, yeah.
Welcome to Questioning Conversations, presented by the National Park Service National Underground Railroad Network to Freedom program. The Network to Freedom was established in 1998 and promotes awareness and understanding of the history of the Underground Railroad, which it defines as resistance to enslavement through escape and flight. It includes the people who escaped, which we refer to as freedom seekers, and those who assisted them in their efforts. It is one of the nation's earliest civil rights movements. My name is Deanda Johnson. Today I'm joined by Michael Trotter and Tanya Blount Trotter of the critically acclaimed, category defying husband and wife duo, War and Treaty. Now, just to start us going, do you remember when and or what you first learned about the Underground Railroad?
I sure do. I grew up in a county in Maryland, Prince George's County, which at the time was one of the leading African American communities for African Americans. And I remember being in the fourth grade, and my teacher at the time, Miss Green, she did this big presentation about the Underground Railroad and how important it was to our history, and told us about Harriet Tubman. And she gave us a sense of pride because, of course, Harriet Tubman, it was in Maryland, and she gave the history of that. And I just had a sense of pride, really, when she told our class about that. And that she was a woman that led this incredible journey for her people. And as time goes on, we're still learning about all the things she did. So I was in the fourth grade when I learned about Harriet Tubman and her civil rights efforts.
How about you, Michael?
I honestly cannot remember because it feels like all my life. Um, when I first was introduced to her, it was by way of Moses. Actually in the Bible, he is one of my favorite characters, and what he symbolized was setting people free. But when I learned that there was a woman who they called Moses, she was like the Moses of her day and her time. And I think the thing that stuck out to me most was just not only her resilience, but just how bold and how um, she wasn't willing to not be free. I think that we glance over that characteristic, that boldness, and she wasn't always that bold. Um, to be able to grow into this boldness and to say enough is enough, um, and of course, as we travel through the years, um, we learn a little bit more about her. Something. When I was in the second grade, I had a teacher I was attending in Cleveland, Rama Junior Academy, and I had a teacher by the name of Miss Bessie White. She was a music teacher, and one of the songs that she had taught us was an actual Swahili song in Swahili, um, that they often sang once the English terms were being figured out. Like after Sweet Low Sweet Cherry, and after Rise of Shepherd and Follow, and all of those kind of those what we call them as Negro spirituals, but what they were just simply um, messages that were put to tune so that it could throw someone off. But then after a while, people started catching on to that. Notice I said people. So there was a Swahili song, and it says, Ishe Olua Kolebajeo, Ishe Olua Kolebajeo, 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 Ishe Olua Kolebajeo. And Ishe Olua is, it says, the work of God cannot be spoiled. It cannot be spoiled. No, it cannot be spoiled. The work of God cannot be spoiled. And that was your sign for saying, keep going, keep going, keep going, because whatever you're doing, it won't rot, it won't spoil. It's good labor, it's good fruit. Or as John Lewis would say, it's good trouble. So for me, I can tell you that that was the second grade I learned that song, and I never ever forgot it, and it stayed with me, and it is something that I I believe with my whole heart that the work of God, the work of Harriet Tubman, the work of John Lewis, and the work of you, Day, and the work of Michael and Tanya Warren Treaty, it cannot be spoiled. So we must keep going. And
Do you remember growing up in your family learning stories about the Underground Railroad, or did it mainly come from school?
for me, I'll be honest with you, in the Cleveland public schools system, I remember early in, I want to say, first grade, second grade, third grade, hearing quickly, like quick footnotes about Harriet Tubman. But of course, she was bunched in with some of our other heroic figures, uh, mainly like Sojourner Truth and Frederick Douglass and Charles E. Boyce, or it didn't matter. It was Martin Luther King Jr. Um, they were all mentioned at the same time instead of having a week where you could spend on the importance of knowing about the existence of Harriet Tubman, a week on the importance of knowing what kind of boldness, because there's a thin line between being bold and being rude. There's a lot of things that was quickly glanced over in the schools. However, when I would get home and I'd be able to ask questions to my mom, my grandmother, about Harriet Tubman, I was very impressed with the information that I got at a young age. One of the information that was exchanged to me was something that we're starting to hear about widely nowadays, and that's the gun-toting Harriet Tubman. And really understanding that she was kind of a little bit borderline gangster with her freedom, and the liberties it took to be not only just someone who wanted to see her and her people freed, but a woman toting a gun during that day and age. Like, I mean, this is something that I still feel even today that is not thoroughly examined and thoroughly spoken about. And you know, so for me, in my family of gun toters at the time, that was a yeah, we got freed, but it was the guns, and how she wasn't, like, if that person ain't rolling, all of the secret myths that we put out in the hood. But to know that this boldness, that's what I keep hearing boldness about Harriet Tubman.
Now, you grew up in Cleveland, and Cleveland was a major stop on the Underground Railroad, and you both tend to Underground Railroad seems synonymous with Harriet Tubman, but there's so many other figures. Did you learn about any other Underground Railroad figures growing up or since your adulthood? And what Underground Railroad figure has really captured your attention beyond Harriet Tubman?
And for me, no. And again, for me, the information that we were getting about, like I said, not only Harriet Tubman, but a lot of our black historical figures uh, was bunched up, and if I can politely say, forced in the shortest month in the year. So everyone was really mentioned in the historical sense all together at the same time, And I don't think you are privy to learning something like that in the hood, um, and then you only get deeper when you go into like a HBCU or something like that. In fact, Cleveland was not a point where the education system wasn't focusing on the Underground Railroad as it pertained to Cleveland, which is odd. But in my adult years, let me say this: we moved to Albion, Michigan, and it's Albion is a part of a little cluster of towns. You have Albion, Michigan, you have Homer, you have Marshall, and let me tell you now, the history there is rich as it pertains to the Underground Railroad, the people of their towns, and Harriet Tubman. The history of that whole system is rich in Michigan, um, and not so much spoken about in Cleveland that much.
I didn't know the history of Cleveland in the Underground Railroad. I would like to hear more about it from you, and in a quick snippet, if you could just educate me really quickly. But yeah, as Michael said, we learned a lot in Michigan about the Underground Railroad, and of course, being from Maryland and the history there. And I mean, you can look at every port from here to Barbados. From the time of slavery, we found a way to get around, as people, as African American people and Africans. So I would love to hear a little bit of the history of Cleveland and. Mhm.
Yeah, so Cleveland owed much of its Underground Railroad activity to its geographical location, right? It's right there on the Great Lakes. So a lot of people would make it up to the Cleveland area and then escape by ship, and making their way to probably the Detroit area or one of the other lake ports. Buffalo was another big one. But it also had an extraordinary free Black population. And that's sometimes what we get lost, right? In traditional constructions of the Underground Railroad, right? It's usually about a white Quaker or somebody of white descent helping Black people. And so, really, they become kind of secondary characters in a story which was really about Black self determination. And so, the free Black community in Cleveland was quite prominent and quite vibrant. A lot of the people that were involved, African Americans that were involved, were actually barbers. And that's really interesting, Black barbers, because they're still really important conduits in the community for information. And usually they worked on white clients, so that allowed them to be privy to a lot of information that they wouldn't otherwise have. We see several Black barbers in Cleveland being involved in the Underground Railroad, but then you also have sympathetic whites, very prominent whites, people involved in the legal system. And so it's just really it really shows kind of this interracial network, which is really what made the Underground Railroad exciting, right? You have people working across the lines of race, gender, religion, working together to right what they believed was a great social wrong, which was slavery. And I want to touch on something that you both mentioned. You both seem to be very drawn to this theme of freedom, right? Both in the Underground Railroad. What role, and I was reading about your interviews, and you talk about freedom. Can you talk a little bit why you think freedom is such an important theme for your music and how that parallels to some of the things that you were talking about when we talk about the Underground Railroad?
Well, I can dibble and dabble in that a little bit. My family is from Panama. My mother was from Panama. My grandfather was Jamaican, and my grandmother was from Costa Rica. So on that side of my family, there was another side of resilience. You had the people who came over and worked in Barbados with rice slavery there, and then my mother is the first generation of her family to be an American. So, and then on my father's side, my grandfather was a sharecropper. to be in America and to become an American citizen. And my grandfather was a sharecropper in New Bern, North Carolina, along with my grandmother. They were married for 73 years, and I tell a story all the time that all of their grandkids would come down and we would work as free help every summer, to help them tend the farm and everything. And my grandfather was very, very keen on freedom and ownership and having a legacy to leave for yourself and for your family, and education as well. They really believe that freedom, education, and ownership in this country was the underground railroad for legacy, for us to keep it going. And the more information that we passed along, and the more land that we passed along, and the more legacy of modesty and class. And it was just a generation of growing up with them, watching them, and the understanding that they worked as sharecroppers so that I could be in the band The Warren Treaty, and be able to tell these stories. So I think that being free, not just free in this country, but owning your masters and being able to have your music, where you can create and control your own narrative in your music, has been very, very important for me and for us as the Warren Treaty. It was one of the staples that I told Michael, even coming into the band, that we became a band. We were married for 3 years before we decided to do that. That ownership really was going to be the key for what we could do, and to be able to be free to do the things that you want to do as an artist. So when we talk about freedom, it is really the foundation of who we are as artists and as people.
Yes, well said, baby. I think for me, um, the first thing I think of when I hear the term or the expression freedom is to be unchained, unchained, to not be bound by a ceiling, you know, um, to have the liberty to express what it is you want to convey at the moment. When I look at that in a sense of having a right to exist, this is why we create. This is why we have ourselves defying genres. Don't label me, because my leaders, whose spirits still exist, the spirit of Harriet Tubman, the spirit of Frederick Douglass, the spirit of John Lewis, it is still ringing and yelling and shouting in my ears, saying, unchained, 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 unchained. You are unchained. And then it causes me to want to ask, how am I unchained? Why am I unchained? Who unchained me? And that is the thing that makes me think of everything, every footstep, every droplet of sweat and blood and tears that outline the dust and the sand. This is why I am free to create. That is why we have artists like Rhiannon Giddens. We have artists like Don Flemings, the Carolina Chocolate Drops. We have artists who refuse to let go of the preservation of our history. That is why you have the Warren Treaty. That's why we refuse to forget. It would be dumb not to want information. It would be dumb not to take advantage of the fact that these great and beautiful people sacrifice so much so that you, Day, and me and Tanya can sit here and talk about this, not from a sense of, oh, woe is me, but from a sense of pride and unchained happiness and joy. It's a gift. So it is
Yes.
important for me as the Warren Treaty that when we create our music, we definitely create it so that the listener can be free. Our love, the way we love in our marriage, it frees people. It frees us every day. Just sitting in this interview right now, just looking at your beautiful face, it's freeing. It is assuring and it's comforting to know that we are not forgotten. We're not forgotten in the bowels of the disgusting stench of our history at times, but that there is a beautiful side to this, and we are unchained to bask in it. So that's to me, and I hope we answered this correctly. But this is what's boiling in our
There,
hearts for it. Yeah.
there is no correct answers. There's no correct answers. We just want you to share. And I just feel like I had a sermon. So thank you very much. I feel like I went to church a little bit just now. So thank you very much. But I just thought it was so interesting that you talk about freedom, being free from being dumb, because a lot of freedom seekers also located. One of the first things a lot of freedom seekers did when they reached freedom in the North was get an education, because they realized that freedom, physical freedom was one thing, mental freedom was quite another. And that's why you have Frederick Douglass, you have all those people learn to read and write. And you talk about being unchained. Do you feel your music unchained you from some of the bonds of daily life and just daily existence, being an African American or being a man or any of the identities? Do you feel that it unconfines you? I know you guys are a category, you don't really fit in one genre, but do you feel that liberation in the music that you guys create?
So I'm going to share this from a sense of freedom. Um, I'm a war veteran. I served 2 tours in Iraq, and every day when I woke up in that place, I felt chained. I looked at other human beings; they were oppressed, and it reminded me of a time frame that I didn't even live in, because some of the interpreters were just like Harriet. They had the same want and desires as an Iraqi to be free, to go and try to live in the land of opportunity. And I felt chained every single day until I wrote my first song in Iraq on Saddam Hussein's piano. And it freed me. It unchained my tear ducts. I was able to cry for the first time in Iraq about a buddy of mine who had just got killed. Our music is definitely meant to unchain. And if your music places people in chains, that's wrong. Music, period. That was God's intention. And now, every day, our music unchains my love for my wife, my love for you, my love for my fellow man and brothers and sisters and all around the world. And I definitely feel like our music unchains love. You know, at least, at least I hope that we are intentional about that, and that you can feel that when you see us perform or when you hear it through the airwaves, and then you start to go and do your own education about that song. And just because that song has a happy beat, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's about a joyous thing. Prime example, we have a song called 5 More Minutes, and it's very it's very Al Green reminiscent. Bump, bump, doo, doo, doo. And the chorus is just like 5 more minutes, and everybody's dancing and partying at the concerts. And the whole time, they have no idea that that song is about how her unchained love saved my life. I was going to commit suicide, and Tanya said, "Stay with me. Give me 5 more minutes." Um, and that is why we create. And that's what we're doing.
Great. Yeah. I just think I think music plays such an important role in our lives, and particularly for African American culture. It's always played so many important roles dating back to the period of the Underground Railroad. So it's good that to see people continually bring that together and associated with it liberation.
Yes.
Um, My next question for you is, so in interviews, you guys have talked about how you're working to be a constant testimonial. What would you say is the testimony of the Underground Railroad? Or if I could say another way, what about the Underground Railroad still inspires and resonates with people today? Why do you think people are still drawn to this history, even though it happened hundreds of years ago?
For me, it's fascinating. When you think about a group of people who were snatched away from everything, and to be able to even get those stories to a Harriet Tubman, for her to be able to have that resilience of the ancestors and take it from all around the world and to bring it to the United States. And it's just one word that even in my own life always just resonates through every situation that I go through. It's resilience. It's the power of God. It's the power of, you know, people coming together, this energy that when we all come together and we have one thing in mind, what we can accomplish. And I think that is what the Underground Railroad resonates to so many people, is that, wow, if they could do it and they survive that, then surely we can. There's nothing that we can't do.
Those were great answers. And I think you kind of answered one of my next questions in those questions. So, is there anything you guys would like to ask me about the Underground Railroad? Or is there anything that I haven't asked you that I wished you wished I would have asked you?
No, not for me. You answered my question about Cleveland, so maybe Michael has something.
Well, when we think of in terms of the music of the Underground Railroad and that kind of thing, and thinking of how messages were like conveyed to one another without others outside knowing, what are you familiar with in terms of the music of the Underground Railroad?
So this is actually, the music of the Underground Railroad is kind of how I came to the Underground Railroad. I was working at Ohio University and they wanted to do a, a symposium on music. And so, of course, Ohio is probably one of the best known places for Underground Railroad. And we were looking at several different things, and music was one of the ones, because I think music resonates with people. Like, I hate to say it because I'm a historian, but a lot of people aren't interested in history. So it's about finding different lenses to which people can kind of attach themselves to the history. So we thought music would be one of the best ways to get people who weren't necessarily interested in history to at least pretend to be interested in the Underground Railroad. So I think there's so many things about music and, the African American experience. I mean, that's one of the first things they try to take away from us when we were here, right? They took away the drums, but we still found a way. No matter what they said, music is important to our existence, and we found a way. Um, and so, but there are these songs that we associate with the Underground Railroad. Of course, Swing Low, Sweet Chariot. That, one of the things that, when we talk about Zora Neale Hurston, she talks about one of the ways that African American culture, one of the, kind of the uniquenesses of African American culture is that we have really mastered the double entendre, this kind of coded language, the way of saying one thing, but also saying another at the same time. So if you're not initiated into it, you wouldn't know what we were talking about. And music helped that on the Underground Railroad, because this was a secret illicit activity. So how do you pass this information? You can wrap it in music, and that's the way that you can get it, tell people where to meet at night. You know what I mean? There's so many different things you can convey. And then we could also say, we could be talking about our own experience of enslavement, but we can be talking about the enslavement of Israelites, right? And see the parallels in their existence and the parallels in our own existence. And I think that's one of the most exciting things about, like, looking into music. Yes, it says one thing. Yes, it's beautiful. Yes, it's artistic, but it's deep, right? It hits you on so many different levels. And I think that's one of the things, right, that you guys are trying to do with your music, right? And you guys are creating community. And so I think that's one of the really exciting things about kind of history is connected to art, right? Yeah. You guys are artists, I'm a historian, but together they help us make sense of the world.
Yes.
In different ways. And I think that's powerful. And so was really excited to have you both join me. I hope I answered your question.
You
I was going to tell
did.
you guys,
Yeah.
don't ask me too hard questions.
Run, Mary, run. Run, Martha, run. Run, Mary, run, I say. You've got a right to the tree of life. You've got a right to the tree of life, yeah. Run, Mary, run. Run, Martha, run. Run, Mary, run, I say. You've got a right to the tree of life. You've got a right to the tree of life, yeah. Run, Mary, run. Run, Martha, run. Run, Mary, run, I say. You've got a right to the tree of life. You've got a right to the tree of life, yeah.